Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio Podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada.
The conversation that you and I had in the car about, getting into like research-based versus evidence-based versus science, and how I think a lot of people are they're a bit confused because they're just listening to anyone online right now and who's saying, well, the research shows this. And I think your perspective was I thought was really interesting. And I think Derek and I just wanted to have a conversation with you about that. Nothing high level, just do like a nice little intro and just talk about how I think a lot of people out there right now, I think the research is very important, but is that enough? Get what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. I know what to say.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to introduce Derek. I'm very excited about this. I'm introducing Charlie Weingroff. Derek, I think you might have known Charlie before I did. I think you guys maybe known each other before I did, which I consider Charlie
way older than you.
Yeah, no, Charlie's not. I think Charlie's the youngest one here, but
I'm part Canadian, and even though I'm at this branch on the Charlie Francis tree, and this guy is like up here, like that's I'm considered a surrogate. He was the number one man.
But I love it. I'm going to give a quick, so given the intro to Charlie, I know everyone listening probably right now, eventually when they're listening, knows who Charlie is. But Charlie, has been a doctor of physical therapy, a certified athletic trainer, certified strength and conditioning specialist. He's worked with, many Hollywood A-listers as I have, more professional athletes than I ever will. He's been like a brother to me for the last 12 years, has created an incredible business, travels the world with specific people that I can't even mention. Previous roles, he's worked with the Sixers, men's Canada basketball, U.S. Marine Corps, special ops.
His Buccaneers destroyed my Chiefs. Come on.
That was a couple years ago where I got a call in the wee hours after the Super Bowl, and somebody told me that he broke his hand. And I'm like, you punched that little kid in the helmet on that sack, didn't you? And he goes, yeah. So his hand wasn't broken.
I love it. But I think getting in the world of physical therapy, and I think getting in the world of I've never said this, but problems. When someone has a problem and something's going on and people are scratching their head and they don't know what's going on, I'd probably put you at the top of a list of people that you're probably the number one guy I'm sending someone to.
I like that, Don. I think I struggle immensely to describe what I do, because obviously the degree is physical therapy, and usually it's like, oh, like what do you do? And then I'll look at Allie or let them describe, or let someone else describe what I do, because honestly, a lot of people probably in different spaces, they have no idea I'm a physical therapist, because most of the glorified jobs that I've had has been in officially strength and conditioning, and then vice versa. And even I think it was last Monday at the time we're filming, I had an NBA player in LA where we do our biomechanics testing, and it's a researcher, so we use things that are very, very objective. It's not very commercialized, but he's like this ardent APTA, like American Physical Therapy Association, and he asked, can some of the students watch? I said, of course, like they're not going to film anything or whatever. And the athlete strength coach was there, and they're asking me questions like, am I a PT? And he's like, they don't know who you are. I'm like, listen, I don't know who they are either. So everything's fine. Like it doesn't, but I like, if I had to describe in some way, like I'm a problem solver, because I've gotten out of the profession quite a bit over the last several years because of having clients that are, as a physical therapist, where they're like, you have a way of, you just use the human body, but like the algorithms of creating solutions is very similar to what happens in business. So I'm a problem solver. That's all I can't solve them all, but
no, but there's a list of people I'm going to, and it's definitely, you're definitely at the top. You are a fixer. So, Charlie, Derek, as you know, Charlie's been such a close friend, but also someone that I cannot tell you how much I've learned from. I think working with Charlie at Drive, Charlie, it's got to be 12 years we were in there together. And the amount of times I would just sit in the office with him, with a client of mine that Charlie was working on, and just listen and watch. And Charlie, I never told you this, but one of the best lessons that you taught me was probably 10 years ago. We were sitting with someone who, I worked with early in the morning, and you worked with a lot. And I'm not going to mention his name, but I came in. I said, this guy's just kind of like hyper flexible. He's all over the place. And you're like, okay, let me take a look at him and see what's going on. And you kind of went through everything with me when you put him through the SFMA. And I screened him. You went and put him through an SFMA, which is for people who don't know, that's one of the screenings, one of the many screenings that Charlie uses. And you gave me the instructions. I sat down and I started writing this program. And I sat down with you and I dropped this like massive program in front of you. And you looked at it, you started reading, and you started kind of shaking your head, and you looked at him and you're like, Don, deadlift him. And I just kind of stopped for a second. Like you were like 5x5, heavy deadlifts, heavy front squatting. We got to get this guy stable. We got to get him tight. And I was like, I felt like an idiot. My jaw hit the floor. I'm putting bands, this, that, to try and fix every little detail in every little area. Back then, the program looked like a Chinese menu. Like I thought I was being smart. I thought I was approaching it. And you gave me a simple approach of deadlift him and squat him. And we started slow over that 12 to 16 week period of time. I think we ran like a Bill Star 5x5. We worked on tension techniques. We worked on his foot placement. We worked on getting in a position, coming out of the hole with some speed. And to be honest, I think we probably fixed 90% of his issues that I was trying to in that short period of time. And it was the simplicity that you delivered to me there. I really attribute to my training career being able to go off in a certain direction and learn and understand that sometimes less is more. So thank you for that. But we were having a conversation a few weeks ago, driving to perform better. And we're talking about, I brought up to Charlie about research. I'm like, man, I'm everything that gets thrown to me, people send me stuff. What do you think that this person says? And sometimes, you're happy to answer, and sometimes you're rolling your eyes because it's just complete garbage. But, I'm feeling like now these professionals out there can't start a conversation without saying research shows. Research shows. And it's something that sounds very intelligent out of someone's mouth. But it also, I think, steers people into believing, well, that's life. That's 100% correct. He's stating research shows, and that's all it is. And I think, Charlie, we went on a rant for about an hour on this stuff, CW.
We had a long ride.
We had a long ride, but I kind of wanted to just start breaking in this conversation and getting some perspectives from you and Derek, and hopefully allow people here to leave, thinking a little bit more for themselves. Well,
I think it's good that said individual would say the research shows instead of saying they have shown, because no one really knows who they are. But look, it's there's so many directions to go, but I think the pink elephant, at least in today's day and age, which probably lasts at least 10 to 15 years, is the nature of how that message is consumed. Because if you go back 20 to 25 years, it would not be consumed through social media. Like it would just be consumed in a different way. And the lens of how the same exact words from the same exact type of individual is completely different. Where, with a little bit of prep, how did I want to say this? Like it went from, maybe 20, 30 years ago is like, my dad can beat up your dad. And then it became, my dad can bench press more than your dad. And now it's my dad has more followers than your dad. So like, if it's on, now look, that's totally canned. It's
very funny.
But you see, my point is the way to kind of, and obviously there's words that live in social media like clout or whatever these terms are, that's the chase. And I think the value that people find in whatever social media brings is immensely intoxicating, and I think that's the right word. It's intoxicating of what this can bring for people, and I've studied this from years ago simply to try to understand, why people do what they do, because that's a problem that I can't solve. I don't know, and everybody has their own perspective. And as long as people stay in their own home, figuratively, who cares? Because social media, people care more, because it does bring us together in maybe less than a positive way as it relates to this topic. But in the study of like when you see these horrible, horrible things that happen when people join cults. Like think of now cult, C-U-L-T, is the short word of one of the most valuable words in all of communal living is culture. Like cult and culture, cult, the most evil thing ever. Culture, the chase, at least in professional sports or business, we always want to create culture, create culture. So they're really not different. They're actually the same Latin root. And in creating a cult, though, where it's these more nefarious ways of creating this type of thing, there's something called the bookend effect, which is now relates to this research shows. Because if you start your statement with this very, very desirable, goal. So whatever somebody is saying, well, the research shows that if you run 10 miles every day, then you'll have a great heart. So you have two things. You have this factual statement that in every way, shape, and form is completely like real. Like that the research is a real statement. I'm not making any assumptions that the research was written poorly or shouldn't have been published. This is grade, whether it's grade A or not. I think we talked a little bit about that because research is literally graded by letters. I'm saying this is good research. Like nobody can poke holes in it and it got published, because if there's so many holes and it's like any level of standards are not being met, it's not going to get published. Okay, so that's on this side. The bookend is over here, and then you have a good heart, that's over here. So when somebody who's not stupid but undereducated, meaning they don't really know the answers to these things, they're coming to find it through these means like social media, that individual can say almost anything they want in the middle to get, and that's how do you find these really smart people that believe things that are basic violations of at least current standards of science, meaning as it relates to the human body, the laws, I'll try to do, you guys know I do voices. It's really just me trying to sound like somebody else. One of my mentors that you guys know, Val Nasetikian, he's like, you can do whatever you would like. I don't care. As long as it is by the laws of biology and physics. So biology and physics are the laws. Now, look, they could be different tomorrow, but there's a scientific process that has to happen for those laws to change. So people will believe things that are completely inconsistent with biology and physics because this thing was factual in the beginning and so desirable at the end, you could tell them anything. Yeah, like to run 10 miles a day and you'll have, and because it's I think the real questions that then need to be asked is not, was that research not good enough to be published, or certainly was it being nefarious? What is the actual context of all the people that ran, and how hot was it outside, and what type of shoes did they wear, and what was the state of their degenerative meniscus on the left but not the right? It is infinite, because when you look at research, the goal is to find the truth. However, my opinion, it's really not opinion, but I have to say it's opinion because it's a perspective, is that the best research, level A, double blind, is as univariant as possible, meaning there's as few variables as possible. Remember, the more variables that you put into those people that ran 10 miles, you need more sample size. There's probably a number for every variable you're going to have. You have to have at least another 20 samples. If that number is not correct, you can cuff me, but I think it's 20. So you want to have as few variables as possible. Otherwise, it would borderline be impossible to even run contemporary statistics, because you would need so many people in order to make any type of sense of this. So the word is univariant and linear. All we said was running. We didn't say what time of day. We didn't say how they were carb loaded. We didn't say if they did a sauna when we're done, or any kind of foolishness because it would actually make sense for the scientific process. So maybe their heart doesn't do better if they
athlete or non-athlete, right?
Anything.
Yeah, it's like,
but again, the more complicated that we look at the research, it doesn't make it wrong research. It doesn't make it bad. It's just maybe not as applicable to what you want to do. So the words are univariant and linear. Real life is multivariant and nonlinear. So it doesn't mean that this is a poor study. There's no suggestion of that. But really, it's really a guiding or a starting point for you to make whatever is the best decision. And that's where I think people that know that, whether they use the same words as I do or not, people that know that there's no way that those 75 people in this study are the same 75 people that I work with. People know this. They get this sense. Now, of course, there's always going to be people that just want to antagonize, because we can get to that. We can get to that too. But that's where this starts. But not everybody has that perspective. So again, based on what social media is, oh, bam. Because if you want to be popular in social media today, not when it first started, I think there's two ways to do it. And I think some of the examples you're talking about check both boxes. Number one, say the opposite of somebody who's really, really popular. That's a great way to get recognized. Yo, Don, did you see what so-and-so said about you? Or maybe it's someone not on this call, but somebody who's very, very well known, and somebody just picks them apart, whether it's warranted or not. Like that, but you're going to listen. Oh my God, did you see what so-and-so said about that person? It's just human nature. So you'll get eyes on what you're doing. The other one is to just run the evidence-based route. Like, nope, can't do that. The research doesn't support that. You're not allowed to do it. And then people are going to listen, because again, it antagonizes a varying level of accepted message. So you can take that research where running 10, I'm making this up, obviously, running 10 miles is good for your heart. Well, we like to run 9 miles. Nope, Charlie's an idiot, because just because somebody actually didn't do the study, that doesn't mean I'm not getting the results. I am not obliged to write this study. I am allowed to be a heuristic more than a researcher. And Aaron Coots told me this in a restaurant in Sydney, Australia several years ago, because you can do anything. You don't have to, you just have to write it down and run your own scientific method if you really want to make statements. Now, I may not even care. I'm like, yeah, we run 9 miles. I'm really not concerned with what so-and-so says. Now you see there's a lot of ingredients in this murky situation where, why do people care? What is the person's motive? And then what is the listener? What is their standard of acceptance? And it's like, it all starts with this research paper that isn't wrong. It just might not always be right. And the last thing I'll say in this opening is the most substantial definition of evidence-based practice, what the literature says, is only 1/3 of that answer. And it may not be 33% of each. It could be some varying level, but is what does the current literature say? Number one. Number two, what do you have access to? Meaning, I live on a ski slope. We can't run 10 miles. Well, what can we do that's similar to the physiological components? Oh, but the research didn't say you were allowed to go snowshoeing, so that doesn't count. Of course it counts. And then thirdly, what is the population as a clinician? What do they prefer? What do they like? What do they want to do? That's the essence of evidence-based, which is very, very different than science. The scientific method is very, very different than what literature shows. The scientific, like if I ran the scientific process by logging out and coming back in without my headset. I had a problem. I needed to create a solution. I tried something, and my hypothesis was that I would be able to be heard if I took my ears out. It worked. That's the scientific process. I don't need to publish this. And I think that frustrates some people sometimes when somebody is maybe trying to be an innovator, maybe winning, maybe losing. But if it's not in the research, it gives somebody this sword to kind of cut you up with, and it's kind of sucks. But that's really a summary of what I think we were talking about in the car, Don.
D.
That was very good. I mean, from just listening to you, if I just walked into the room, I would say, wow, in order for me to benefit from research, I have to be pretty intelligent. I have to be pretty reasonable in terms of, just how I interpret things and all that. And I have to take a common sense approach to make research useful to me, because everything you said to me is like, well, when I know for myself, when I see somebody sends me an abstract or a title of an article, I'm like, well, I have to look at the entire article. Like, I need to see the entire research. I need to see the subjects, the study design, blah, blah, and all. and then I'll get a better understanding of it. But how many people do that? How many people are like, and another example is, it seems like when I'm invited to a conference now, they're giving me less time to speak, right? So it used to be like you get an hour, 90 minutes. Now I'm getting 20 minutes. It's like TED Talk, right? And so I'm thinking, well, what am I going to say in 20 minutes that's going to spark interest for them to do a deeper dive into my topic and really start, taking it upon themselves? So that's what I got from that, is that we need people. Research is really there to kind of spark interest and make people work harder. Does that sound right?
It's a yeah, of course it's right. I think it's here, let me put a real world example. So you guys know Sam Gibbs, who brought me into Canada basketball. And what we don't really have in America is genuine osteopathy, which we have in Canada. So if you have a DO, they're really just a lame, MD. They have all the same privileges. If you go into your doctor, I mean, we have excellent DOs that are orthopedic surgeons. This is not an osteopath that you would see in Canada, which is very influenced from Western Europe, where in the UK, an osteopath, it's because also physical therapist is different than it is in American and Canada. It's all the same words, but they're different. An osteopath to a true individual who is very familiar with an American culture of health and fitness, osteopathy looks like magic. Like there's no reference point as to how these methods are working. And they just have a different standard, a different book. It's not nearly as wild as maybe Asian medicine. Also, brilliant stuff that goes off this completely different manual, if you will. Okay, so at that same conversation, and it was with Aaron Coots, who was on the original Nike board. We brought him to Canada to spend the summer with us. And then when we had friendly games there, we would spend a lot of time. We trained at his college, City University of Sydney, et cetera, et cetera. This is one of the most well-known, sports scientists, in the world. It's just because sports science in America isn't really what it is in other parts of the world. So he was saying, like, Sam's like all over the place. I mean, like, he had never seen any of these things before because he's very, the barriers of research. But he's like, but you guys are clearly getting results. I remember dry needling him, which I thought was a shock. He's like, I had no idea this is what dry needling was, because manual therapy in Australia and New Zealand is kind of like a well-known thing. He's like, my back is never fine. His back felt great, whatever. That's not the point. The point is that he never even knew that that's what you could do with dry needling and create this kind of result. So he's like, you guys are like, Sam's in this other level, but as long as you guys just write down what you're doing, that's a heuristic. Like, you're not a bad person if you're a heuristic, meaning you're just going to do what you want to do. And you just, put all these things, put all of these things together. So that, my response, Derek, is like, whatever I've written down is the same as research. It's just a guide. Like it's more of like a hand holding. And sometimes that hand holding can take you immediately to an endpoint, an action plan. But a lot of times it's just on the way, where it kind of maybe eliminates poor choices, but doesn't always tell you what the exact correct choice is. And I think almost every research paper that has value is going to have some language saying this topic requires more research, because we know that in order for that research to really hold up, it can't encompass everything that a heuristic can encompass. So I think that's absolutely, like, some of the other things, that's, you actually have to know what the words are in a research paper. So, like, what is end? What is subject? You have to understand statistics. You have to understand the standards of the statistics that you're using, all of these things. So it's not just only reading the abstract, which I think a lot of people that are in this space would be very condemning towards. Like, of course you're allowed to read it, but that's not the standard of judging what this paper says. The title in the abstract is not you can't do that. Like, that's not logical. You have to read the whole thing. And it's not like this is quantum physics, but you have to know what these words mean, and it's more than just reading the conclusion of the abstract. So again, taking it back to what I think is going to be useful to most people listening, especially if they're in the general population. No one is being accused of being stupid. It's that this, like, I might find it strange that somebody would look to social media for that level of solution, but everyone has a role in social media. It's a big, to me, it's like this big game. We all play a character, and there's some characters that aren't always good guys. But if they're really slick, they're going to use this bookend effect. So again, it's the lens, because if you go back 25 years, it would be a conference where instead of 20 minutes, each speaker gets 2 hours, and they're going at each other. Hopefully in somewhat of a professional way. If it's a real debate, I'm going to crush you. Like a debate is like a win and loss. Like an argument is just, a real debate. There's a judge and there's rules to a debate, and that doesn't really happen anymore for whatever reasons. And that's where, again, that it always goes back to, it's not a suggestion that the statement is wrong. It's just not as complete as we need it to be.
Well, does it work both ways? Because I was listening to an internal conversation. I'm not going to mention the person's name. He didn't say anything wrong, but he turned around and he was discussing his demographic. He's a PhD. He was discussing his demographic, and he said that, well, my demographic really prefers to only listen to doctors and PhDs. Okay, interesting, right? I also think, in a way, I think it's insulting to a lot of people out there who've spent their entire life's work in developing, their craft and learning from some incredible people. I mean, one of them being Charlie Francis, right? You gave Charlie Francis some pretty big props coming early on in this intro, but Charlie got his history degree from Stanford. Charlie wasn't a science-based, Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, but he wasn't some science-based, running mechanics coach that is sitting in a lab at Stanford with electrodes hooked up to someone's leg, and in the scene of Drago where they're testing. That wasn't Charlie Francis. He was an Olympian. He was someone that's worked with some incredible athletes, and he really formed his own hypothesis based off of what it was he learned and did throughout his career. And he created, call it what you want, Derek, a system, a training method, whatever it is, he created and put it out there. Do you think a lot of these researchers, PhDs, where people are going too far in the direction of just listening to them? Because what I'm gathering from a lot of them is they're just doing the research in a lab, and they're not actually the ones going out and doing a lot of the physical work themselves, to where I think someone like me learned a lot over 30 years of getting underneath the bar or running or getting injured and having to sit with someone like you for 12 years and learn about injury, and sitting with clients and learning how, and I'm not a PT, but just that educational piece of learning from someone like you, and you were one of many people I've learned from, allowed me to develop this kind of Rolodex of information in my life. So do you think people are going too far in the direction of like, well, you got to learn from researchers? Isn't it inconclusive a little bit when they're not actually doing the work or out there on the field themselves at times? Or do you disagree with me? You have plenty of times in my life. It's fine.
Is this for me? Sorry, or Charlie?
It's
for Charlie.
Oh, it's for me. I would not say inconclusive. I would say incomplete. That's again semantics, because again, I'm not. I have to remove myself from making any suggestion. I have to use these words carefully, that I'm not questioning the quality of what there is. I think it's more of a perspective of what it is in the first place. Now, if somebody is only going to listen to that, hey, there's a lot of, I could make some sarcastic comments that maybe people will laugh at. Like if you're only going to follow what a researcher says, you are likely only doing what someone else did upwards of 2 years ago. That's come at me, bro. Like that's because it takes time from when and that can be with anything. Like the moment, like we're filming this, whatever day it is, somebody might not watch this for a year from now. We may not believe what we're saying right now. That's allowed. So maybe if you're going to be an innovator, you have to choose. Like you're going to be, because researchers, their role in this machine, not what I was referencing before with social media, they're supposed to get the questions and find if what innovators are saying is true under certain circumstances. And you have to start at the most basic consistency of circumstances, maybe not even what the innovator is doing. So you have to kind of create, like, okay, what is the research? What is the innovator saying? They're saying that if we run, okay, well, if we maintain this speed, is the same thing happening? Is reliability? Are you doing, like, does what you're saying even hold any water, that if you do it 10 times in a row, right or wrong, the same thing is going to happen? That's reliability. So there is no validity unless there's reliability. Validity is, did this thing actually do what you said it was going to do? So it can't possibly be that if it's not reliable. Now, to do those initial studies, that might be as like the world of the innovator is like this, and then the study is like this, because and then the study goes here, and then the study gets here, et cetera, et cetera. That's the correct way to begin this. But until there's an innovator who's challenging things in hopefully not a negative way, then the researcher will create an environment with enough repetitions to see, is this actually the truth? Now, here's the thing, that again, where social media, has become a significant antagonist, the researcher is not supposed to care. The researcher has no skin in the game. There is nothing to stop a researcher who's making, whatever at a PhD, at University X, from building a social media model where now the same things don't matter anymore. So if that is a certain degree of bias. That's why we may not see this a lot in fitness, but we'll see it in high-level medical conferences, where it is incumbent on the speaker to reveal any potential relationships that they have that may have an impact on what they're saying. Where in fitness, it doesn't exist because the standards are just not the same. It doesn't make one right or wrong. So do they have anything to disclose that a researcher that I will consult with significantly, he's even in a closed phone call, he like, hey, listen, just so you know, PepsiCo supported this study, like, even, and it's not because obviously Pepsi as a company has many things other than rotten soda, but there's other things that they sell that could potentially impact what the answer was to this study. That doesn't mean it has to, okay? That doesn't mean it has to. So all of those things, again, is more incomplete than any, than if somebody's only going to listen to that person, I'll be like, all right, man, now at least they're listening to somebody, because then there's that bookend effect can work the same way when there is no research at all. No one's ever researched certain things. And if it's presented in a very convincing fashion to the right voice, AKA a cult, then all of a sudden everybody's doing, tiptoes and
it's a good point, but it's a good point. I almost rather people deliver their information or their opinion that way. Like, listen, I've read this research, it states this, and I've actually been utilizing this for the last 30 years of my life, and this is what I found. Like that to me might even be a little bit more intelligent than just, because how many times, and I talked to Boyle about it, I've spoken to Greg Rose about it, and I've gone to them years after. Remember, I went through, I think you and I were the first I know I was the first TPI3. So I've gone to Greg and been like, do you guys still use this? And they're like, no. I'm like, why not? They're like, because we evolved out of it. We just realized it's not important. And I'm like, I was sitting there at a certain point going, wow, like I listened to this 20 years ago like it was the be all end all, and I'm preaching it like it was the be all end all. Shit on me for doing that, because that's my fault. But they ended up, being very honest and saying like, no, we just don't find value in it anymore. And Boyle has turned to me on countless times and said, no, I've changed my mind. And I'm like, okay, like that to me is interesting, because we're speaking to people who are valued at a specific level in our industry. I want to hear their opinion, not some guy putting a bunch of test rats through a 6 week.
The three of us know that whether it's the names you're mentioning, the three of us or three other people, if you're in a different camp that didn't always exist, there wasn't always these camps, then they're like, oh, they're full of shit, like, because they're not in the same that as somebody that okay, so there's certain models that I significantly champion, and because they're so multivariant, they're literally impossible to research. Impossible. So anytime someone does research it, it shows that it doesn't do certain things. Okay, but that's not what I'm doing.
But
like,
you know.
But well, it's not about I know. It's like, okay, but I'm not wrong. Like, you're just making this thing up. Like, that's, and also keep in mind, guys, that if you take 10 studies and 5 say that it worked and 5 said it didn't work, that means it didn't work. No one cares about the 5. So then you get into this, the difference between scientifically significant, which 9 out of 10 is not even science. You need to be in the 98, 99 level. But then what's clinically significant, and then you're going to get into some potentially insensitive statements that if someone has a grave illness, are you going to try this method that has a 70% success rate, or you're going to, or not do it and die? Like, now, oh, but the research doesn't support this, and then you get into FDA, et cetera, et cetera. So that concept of scientifically significant, again, because in order to say this, there's data, there's statistics, there's confidence levels, there's Bayesian models, like all of this stuff that no one talks about ever on social media. If you're below that, like 1 little centimeter below it, it did not work. It did not, there was no impact, really. So 94%, which would be bad level, like it didn't work according to research. So now, can you still learn something from that? Meaning somebody might still, I have to believe that if I read that paper because it was relevant to how I was trying to help somebody, I'm like, you know what? I didn't draw that line right there. And even though 94%, this one statement in this particular form of media says X, I'm going to run with Y because I didn't make that line right there that they did make. And 94 out of 100 sounds interesting to me. And then you run it. And I think the biggest thing is, like, why do people care? Like, why do people even care what somebody else does? And again, I know I can think of one reason why I would care, because I want to make money. And if I have a different standard on how to, gain money, then that works. And people have some very dastardly standards, some very low standards on if they say certain things, whether it's research-based, science-based, which are a little bit different, as we've said. Then all of a sudden you have courses, you can sign up for this, and it's okay. Like, that doesn't bother me. They're not, it's just a game. Like, we're all in this, and I may not like it, and we can talk about it, hopefully professionally in a proper setting. It's just that when people go after other people for no reason other than to create this image, this content, that sucks. Like that's, and I know we talked about that too, because they're not wrong. Like, the research or just simple opinion, like, that is garbage. If I wasn't doing garbage, you would never have content. That's no good. Like, don't ever do. I don't think that's cool to do. But people don't even realize it. Like, they don't even realize what they're watching, that this individual would never have any content if he or she wasn't banging on somebody else who they don't even know. They don't even know who this person is. And of course, what they would say off camera is probably very different anyway.
Of course. Derek?
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely with what you guys are saying, because I went through this process for the last few years where I was going through the research on electrical muscle stimulation, right? And so if you go through, you will find a lot of studies that don't support it, but those are useful. Those are useful to me, because what I'll end up doing is I'll say, I know what works for me. And then I go into the study and I'm looking at it and they're like, oh, I found something that they are doing different in the study that's different from what I'm doing. So maybe that's why they didn't get a result. So on a lot of these electrical stimulation studies, they leave it up to the participant to choose their intensity, right? Because from an ethical point of view, you can't turn it up too high. Otherwise, people freak out and crap their pants, right? So if they're not turning it up, they're not getting the same stimulus and adaptation that I would get in my own personal use of it, right? Or with my clients. So right away, I'm like, okay, well, that rules out that study because they're not doing the same thing that I'm doing. So maybe that's why they're not getting the result. And then you start looking at pad placement on muscles, and they're not using like a motor point device to figure out where the optimal motor point is. So they're just slapping them on where they think it should go. Okay, well, that rules out that study. So by virtue of the fact that there are studies that are having different outcomes than my result is useful, because I'm going through and figuring out, oh, okay, this actually supports what I'm doing. So I think now I'm almost expecting to find studies that well, on the surface disprove what I'm doing, but when you dig deeper, they actually support what I'm doing. So I think it's useful to see all these different studies and figure out why they might get a result versus what you're doing. And I think, but you have to go through that mental exercise. And as you guys have said, Charlie said, you have to have the experience to be able to go in as like a crime scene investigator and figure out why it's different. If you don't have that experience, you can't deduce why they're getting a different result. So I think, all of these things you guys are saying about having an intelligent approach with how to assess research is so important.
Yeah, guys, there's a conduit, Derek. There's a conduit to what you're saying that I think of quite a bit. Research shows that scratching your arm doesn't increase, wrist extension. Okay. A lot of people scratch people's arm and they increase it. Except the research was attacking this question from an assumed physiological response, when in fact, there did have this very real change in wrist extension. It just wasn't because of what they were testing. So then they call it a placebo. And I would say most of the time, it's not a placebo, you just measured the wrong thing. And again, you'd have to then, like I know when they talk about these things sometimes, like if I'm really digging in, I used to actually literally do this. I did it when I used to do my own seminars. I had all the research papers that I said, this is why I think what I think. This is just what you paid to listen to me talk. Here it is. And then I took the research papers and I laid them all out by when they were published. And then I moved them all around and I'm like, this is the real story. So it's like you have to take, like, this research over here is meaningless, but now it makes perfect sense when you take this one and put it over here. And then you have to then move it over here when this one came in. And that takes, like, if you're really digging in, that's why it's like somewhat impossible to know everything. But it is very possible to have very strong opinions. And then when you have that, it wasn't, you weren't doing anything to the Pacinian corpuscles. Of course, that made no sense. That's why the researchers challenged it so aggressively. Except doing this increases oxytocin, which has an opportunity over time to decrease systemic stress, and then all of a sudden you can improve better. Like, that makes perfect sense. Maybe not the way I said it, but I'm talking too fast. But there's always some other reason as to why something could have worked. It's not that the method, there's very, very famous and very well used manual therapies that say they're breaking up adhesions. I have yet to find any scientific merit to the word adhesion. You could use ultrasound, like there's nothing that shows there. I have seen people do this and all of a sudden something really good happens. You didn't break up an adhesion in one move, or that didn't happen. I don't believe that happened, but I do believe that the method is very, very valuable. So we just don't, how that method is being taught is just wrong from the science level, but it's brilliant from a psychomotor level. It's brilliant to create a solution for somebody. Now the real challenge is, well, are you more positive because you are genuinely helping people, which I firmly believe, or are you negative because you're purporting this thing that's not really happening? Well, there's some merit to that. I shouldn't be saying that I'm breaking up an adhesion. That is completely ludicrous. Like, there's no science whatsoever to say an adhesion exists. So that's a similar, where it just works, but not for the same reason.
Now, sorry,
go.
If somebody kept saying adhesion, and you've proven not, would that be a hit on their character, or how would you assess that?
Well, I probably wouldn't care ultimately, because if the person's wrist moves better, that's all I really care about.
Yeah.
You guys have heard me say a million times, this is my personal now. There's no longer talking about research. I don't care if you spread peanut butter on somebody, does it get the job done? Like, that's because if we have a reliable and valid post measure I don't care what you do. It's completely irrelevant. So now what you're referring to is, Derek, I really think your shirt is garbage. Like, that has no commentary on the quality of human being you are. I just chose to communicate in a way that was objective. Hopefully it was requested. Like, you didn't ask me, but so to think that somehow, and this is actually very meaningful to me, from different roles that I've had in the past, but just because somebody is believing something that is factually incorrect, look at all this stuff behind me. Like no, it's all fake. It's all fantasy. Like, it's all because that's what I like. So if somebody's genuinely helping somebody, my personal opinion is I don't care that they're, but if they feel that it's an attack on their character, like, we're talking about adhesions. Like, we're talking about Scrooge McDuck. Like, come on, like, what does that have to do with your character? You're genuinely trying to help. So what I usually say, this had nothing to do with the person's altruism or their interest in helping. Years and years ago in Canada basketball, we had social systems and processes. Okay, it's basically how do you act. And when you have a machine like we had that was so special, we kept looking for breadcrumbs, and I like, okay, yeah, we all kind of get along. What do we really do? So part of my role as a director was to put all this on paper. And it was a diamond. It was meant to be around the maple leaf, etc. And one of them was when someone says something to you that doesn't jive, like there's no such things as adhesions. Years ago, one of my favorite coaches in football, his name was Herm Edwards. Really, like, Southern voice, like, I want to go to war for this dude. And I remember meeting him once. It was really cool. And he was talking about, he was coaching, he was not in the NFL, and he hadn't gone back to college. He was talking to the players at, like, the Under Armour, like, All-Star game. And I think around that time, there was this period of time where, they could go back in Twitter land, and if you posted something 10 years ago, where those kids would have been like 8 years old, and if it was wrong now, like, you were going to fry. You were going to get in big trouble. So he was like, don't hit send. That was like, he kept saying it. Like, I can always hear his voice. He's like, don't hit send. Don't. So whenever you think you're going to do something, just stop and think about it. And then I took that, and this is just how you can look at research, but I took what that was, and it's like, if someone says something really mean to you, or something that really does hurt, I'm going to say it's really just a scratch or a bee sting. Don't hit send before you respond. So if I attacked your character because you believe adhesions exist, which they do not, don't hit send, Derek. Don't hit send. Ask yourself 2 questions. Is this person really trying to hurt me? I can tell you, if I'm trying to hurt somebody, I'm going to pick something other than adhesions. I'm going to go to work on you. I'm going to get you. The other question that we would teach the interns, like, before somebody says something that's very hurtful, is it possible for a millisecond, is it possible that this person knows something that I don't know? And if you do think the person is trying to hurt you, and it is not possible that they know anything, go get them, destroy them, crush everything in your path. But of course, most of the time, I'm not, if I were to say, and people listening maybe are very, the people that do believe in adhesions, they're somewhat offended. Do you really think I'm trying to hurt you? Like, I don't even know you. I don't care. Like,
right.
I know for a fact that there is no histological study, and I'm doing like ultrasound because that would be the merit, that shows whatever is described as an adhesion in this manual therapy seminar that I'm referring to. So I'm not, and if you think there is adhesions, let's talk about football. Let's talk, like, we can talk about something else, because I know it works. It just works for something else. That's our real discussion here. Like, research may not indicate why something works. So if you tailor the research model to only determine not did it work, but why it worked. Nope, it didn't work because of that. This must be garbage. No, it's not garbage. I've seen it work. I've used it myself. It just didn't work because of why we were taught how it worked. I think that's a very important component to evaluating research.
I want to get your, I got one last question for you, and we greatly appreciate your time. What is your advice to someone who is, listening to a lot of the noise out there? They're They're not a fitness professional. They're not a medical. They're watching stuff online. And what advice would you give to them in filtering, someone who's coming on sounding very smart? That may not be. And you and I have talked about it. There are people, and I'm not going to mention names, that come off sounding very intelligent and very believable. And they're saying the opposite of the truth just to get eyeballs on them. So what's your advice to someone who doesn't know how to depict between one or the other? Tough question.
No, and look, this comes up a lot because it can suck. Like if whoever the third person, not the person posting, not the person watching, but someone else that cares, it takes some time and it takes a unique path to get to a point where you just literally don't give a shit. Like, and that's, it takes time. You have to, and look, that was all a big part of Canada basketball social systems, like how do you act? Like we had a way to talk about how do you get to a place where you don't care anymore because you're good, like you're full. There was the 151-1 rule. But I think the first thing, basically what I think you're asking, Don, is how do you filter the information? I think the first one is, what is the ratio of the person's content that I mentioned before would never exist without someone else's thing? Whether it's their post that they take because it's public domain and put it into their post and then comment on it. Okay? Doesn't mean they're wrong. Doesn't mean they're not hilarious, but that's one thing. Or if their post is talking about this podcast. So hey, I saw a podcast where Charlie was running his mouth about adhesions, and then they make a post about it. If that is the bulk of what they're presenting, delete, block, they're garbage, they're trash. Where I think it's where if this other thing didn't exist, and it's not like you do one, but there was somebody who was in my my team where we work with lots of studs, and even before COVID, he was, because his methods are, I even told him, and I would try to counsel him, like, I don't believe in alternative. It's not alternative. Just because you're one of the few people that do this stuff, you're here because it works. It's not alternative. Just because a lot of people don't do it doesn't make it alternative. So I don't use that word. He just does some different shit. And he was always somebody, because of his profession and his methods that he believed in and that worked, he always probably felt that there was a thumb on him, like he was being marginalized because people didn't really respect what he did as a naturopath. And he started to talk a lot about on social media about crypto, because crypto would be like fighting against the machine. I'm like, seems to me it's like a way to make money or exchange for goods. Like, he thought about it as making a machine. And then when COVID came, he would post like, just he didn't get shadow banned, he got real banned. Like, he was on a list, and he believed what he believed. He was probably correct in everything that he was saying. But I said, yo, can I get one post of why you're special and why you do things that no one else does for every 5 while the rest of us are idiots? Can I at least get one? And like, you see because there's a lot of people that have significant following. Goes back to what I said, just say the opposite of what someone else is saying. And I think if you actually, that you should be able to see that. Like, if somebody is only largely, not 10 out of 10, but like 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, their content would never ever exist without someone else's content. Yeah. It doesn't even mean that they're wrong. I think you got to kind of look side eye at that person, because no one asked them. No one asked them, hey, can you make a post on this? Until that becomes their thing, and that's all that they do. So that's where, it may not be a person, but like a commercial model. Like, I have never made a post about adhesions are dumb. Like, I've never done that, because that's someone's lifeblood. Somebody feeds their family from that. I have no interest in hurting them.
That's the title of the podcast. You know that.
Yeah. Hey, dude, knock it out.
Adhesion influencers and other charlatans.
Make sure everybody remembers that I said, like, I have seen this method work very, very well. It's just not because you're breaking up an adhesion in one thing, in one turn. Like, it's just nonsense.
It seems so simple to you, but this is one of my favorite ones. You made me laugh about 100 times. I love this.
That's the filter. That's the filter. And then the other one, which is a little bit harder, I think, because I've thought about this, is what do you know about the person? Like, what is the relatability? We've talked about this. To me, that's rule number 2 of social media land. Are you relatable? So, but you could be relatable in different ways. So if somebody just actually divulges a little bit, probably not all, of who they are as a human, you might have a better idea of what their motives are. So for instance, if I happen to know that chiropractor X was a real prick going through chiropractic school, and he was really angry because he knew what they were teaching him was wrong, and he was so angry, and then he became this incredibly eloquent and brilliant speaker that had really good science to everything he was talking about. Maybe you'd understand why why he bangs on everybody, because he got banged on. But if you don't know that about this chiropractor, then maybe you would look at his information and put way more value on it, rather than, man, this is just his time to punch back at everybody else because he got beat up a lot when he was in Chiro school.
And I'm going to close on that, and I completely agree with you. I just, if you're smart, if you know what you're doing, you should be able to create your own content and not have to destroy people constantly, whether they're right or wrong. I mean, unless someone is just being so irresponsible in their message, and people, that sometimes can get a bit frustrating. Oh, isn't that good? And you're like, it's terrible. Thank you. Charlie, where can everyone find you on social media? Never a dull moment with you, brother. Love it.
So Instagram is CH Weingroff, website's charlieweingroff.com. And hey, I was asked a bunch of questions. I didn't volunteer anything.
Yeah, I love you, man. You're the best. I will call you later. Again, thank you. Our best to Ali. Exactly. My boy over there. D, thank you, bud. Talk to you guys. Thanks again, guys. Awesome.
Take care, guys.